Nothing captured the spirit of late 70s America quite like T-tops. They were bold, futuristic, and made you feel like you were driving straight into the future. For a while, nearly every car maker wanted a piece of that magic, but just as quickly as T-tops took over American roads, they vanished. So what happened? Why did one of the coolest roof designs in automotive history disappear almost overnight? Today we're uncovering the rise and dramatic fall of the T-top. Origins and invention, 1948 to 1968. Before T-tops became a pop culture icon, they began as a quiet spark inside the mind of a man who refused to draw within the lines of convention. His name was Gordon Buehrig, a designer who helped shape legends like the Auburn 851 boat-tail speedster and the Duesenberg Model J. By his mid-20s, he was already considered one of America's brightest automotive minds. But in 1948, Buehrig imagined something entirely new, a roof that could transform. He believed a driver shouldn't have to choose between freedom and strength. A car could deliver both. He sketched a coupe with a thin center spine down the middle and two removable glass panels on either side, a design that looked more at home in an airplane hangar than on a Detroit assembly line. He called it the T-bar roof, and it debuted on a futuristic prototype called the Tasco. Its cockpit-style roof, inspired by post-war aviation, felt decades ahead of its time. But in 1948, when America was obsessed with chrome fins and tailpipes, the idea of a semi-convertible sports car seemed more alien than innovative. Only one Tasco was ever built, and soon the design was shelved, filed away under too strange for the market. For the next 20 years, the T-top quietly disappeared. Car design marched forward, tail fins got taller, engines louder, but no one touched Buehrig's forgotten patent until 1968. The late 1960s were a golden moment for American cars. Roaring V8s, cheap gas, and bold styling defined the era. Yet beneath the excitement, something was changing. Convertibles were dying. Drivers wanted comfort, safety, and the new luxury feature everyone was talking about: air conditioning. Why battle wind noise and rain when you could roll up the windows and chill your cabin at the twist of a dial? On top of that, US safety regulators were rumored to be considering bans on convertibles entirely. The once romantic open-top design now looked risky, impractical, and outdated. Enter General Motors. When they unveiled the 1968 Chevrolet Corvette, they revived Buehrig's old idea, not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. The T-top offered the perfect middle ground: open-air excitement when you wanted it, structural rigidity when you didn't. It looked exotic, futuristic, and distinctly American, and it was an instant hit. The moment you saw those two glass panels lift out and sunlight pour through that T-shaped frame, you knew this was something new. The Corvette wasn't just another sports car, it was a declaration of style and freedom that captured the spirit of late 60s optimism. What began as one man's forgotten sketch had finally found its moment, and it would soon change the shape of the American coupe forever. The boom when T-tops took over America, 1968 to 1980s. The Corvette's debut with T-tops in 1968 did more than launch a new roof design. It launched a movement. Almost overnight, the T-top became a status symbol. It wasn't just a mechanical feature, it was a statement. It said, "I've got performance, style, and freedom, all in one car." As the Corvette's sales soared, other manufacturers couldn't ignore what they were seeing. By the mid-1970s, T-top fever had spread across the American auto industry. If you were building a sporty coupe or a luxury two-door, you needed T-tops on the options list. They had become shorthand for cool, the same way gull-wing doors defined the exotic cars of Europe. Chevrolet quickly expanded the idea beyond the Corvette. The Camaro gained its own set of removable glass panels in 1978, and Pontiac followed with the Firebird and Trans Am, cars that became pop culture legends thanks to movies like Smokey and The Bandit. With Burt Reynolds behind the wheel, T-tops weren't just for the racetrack anymore. They were the defining image of American swagger. But it wasn't just GM. Ford jumped in with T-tops on the Mustang too, and later the Fox body Mustang. Dodge and Plymouth offered them on models like the Magnum and Aspen. Even Chrysler's Cordoba joined the craze, a luxury coupe with the elegance of a hardtop and the flash of removable glass. What started as a Corvette experiment had become a national obsession, and the craze didn't stop at American borders. By the late 1970s, Japanese manufacturers wanted in too. Nissan introduced T-tops on the 280ZX. Toyota offered them on the Supra, and even Subaru added them to the quirky Brat. At this point, the T-top had gone global. Everyone wanted that open-air look without the compromise of a full convertible. The demand was so strong that even cars which never came from the factory with T-tops started showing up with them. Across the country, small custom shops and conversion companies began cutting into perfectly good roofs and installing aftermarket kits. The most famous was Cars and Concepts, a Michigan-based company that specialized in dealer-approved conversions. If your Camaro or Monte Carlo didn't have factory T-tops, they could fix that for a price. By the late 70s, you could drive almost anything with a T-top, from muscle cars to economy sedans. It was excess, freedom, and individuality all rolled into one, a design that captured exactly what 1970s America wanted to feel. T-tops were sleek, customizable, and instantly recognizable. Every time you removed those glass panels and tucked them behind your seat, it felt like the world opened up. But like most trends born from style and emotion, the T-top's glory days were destined to be short-lived. And by the early 1980s, the first cracks in the glass, quite literally, began to show. The decline, leaks, laws, and the end of an era, 1980s to 2002. By the early 1980s, the T-top had become a victim of its own success. After more than a decade of dominance, the cracks, both literal and metaphorical, began to show. What was once a symbol of freedom was now turning into a headache for owners and manufacturers alike. The first issue? Leaks. Ask any T-top owner and they'll tell you there are two kinds of T-tops, those that leak and those that will. The design that made them unique, those removable panels separated by a central spine, also made them notoriously hard to seal. Unlike a solid roof or even a Targa top, which only needed to seal along the front and rear, T-tops required perfect alignment along three sides. As cars aged, the rubber weather stripping hardened, body flex increased, and soon every rainstorm became a reminder of the design's biggest flaw. Quality control in the 70s and early 80s didn't help either. Manufacturers were struggling with rising costs, new emission standards, and shifting market priorities. Many of the cars that featured T-tops simply weren't rigid enough to handle the structural stress. Over time, the panels squeaked, the seals warped, and what was once a glamorous feature became a costly maintenance problem. Meanwhile, the very market conditions that once helped T-tops thrive were now turning against them. Convertibles were back. When Chrysler launched the LeBaron convertible in the early 80s, it reignited America's love affair with open-air driving. But this time, without the compromises. Power tops became quicker and easier, safety engineering improved, and drivers wanted the real thing again. Why settle for half-open glass panels when you could drop the entire roof with the press of a button? At the same time, automotive engineering was evolving. New safety regulations demanded stronger roof structures, side impact protection, and rollover resistance. Areas where T-tops performed poorly. For car makers, the added cost and complexity just didn't make sense anymore. It was far easier to build a Targa top or a convertible that met modern standards than to engineer a leak-free, crash-safe T-top. Even Chevrolet, the company that made them famous, saw the writing on the wall. When the C4 Corvette debuted in 1984, it abandoned the T-top entirely in favor of a single-piece removable Targa roof. Simpler, lighter, and easier to seal. The design worked and other brands quietly followed suit. By the mid-1990s, the T-top existed mostly as a nostalgic throwback. The Camaro and Firebird soldiered on with their signature glass panels, clinging to the last bit of retro flair in an industry moving toward airbags, electronics, and efficiency. But in 2002, when GM officially discontinued both models, the T-top era finally came to an end. 30 years after its rise, the once iconic design had faded into history. Not with a crash, but with a quiet sigh. No automaker announced its departure, and no press release mourned its loss. The world had simply moved on. Reflection, the legacy of the T-top. Even though the T-top faded quietly from production lines, its legacy never really left. Because the truth is, T-tops weren't just a piece of glass and metal. They were a feeling. They represented a time when cars had soul, when design was emotional, not analytical, when automakers built machines that made you feel something behind the wheel. The T-top was the perfect example of that philosophy, a design that existed purely to make driving more special. No one needed a roof that came apart in two pieces, but everyone wanted one. It turned ordinary commutes into small adventures. In the 1970s and 80s, driving with the T-tops off wasn't just about fresh air, it was about identity. You weren't just a driver, you were part of the road, the sky, and the sound of the engine all at once. It was the closest thing to flying without leaving the ground, and for an entire generation, that became the definition of freedom. Car magazines and TV commercials of the era sold that dream perfectly. Slow motion shots of sunlight glinting off glass panels, hair blowing in the wind, a V8 rumbling underneath. The T-top wasn't for practicality, it was for the moment. That perfect mix of wind, sound, and speed that made driving feel alive. Even now, decades later, the T-top holds a special place in the hearts of enthusiasts. Search any classic car forum, and you'll find stories. People who still remember their first Camaro, or the day they took off their panels for the first time and drove into the sunset. For them, the leaks, the rattles, and the faded weather seals don't matter. Those imperfections are part of the charm. They're reminders of a time when cars weren't sterile. They were mechanical, personal, and loud. Collectors today treat T-top cars like rolling pieces of nostalgia. A clean Firebird or 280ZX with its original panels can spark bidding wars among fans who grew up watching those very cars on TV. For younger enthusiasts, owning one feels like owning a time machine, a direct link back to a time when style was just as important as performance. And while it's unlikely we'll ever see a true T-top again, not in an age dominated by crossovers, crash tests, and electric silence, its influence still echoes in modern design. Panoramic glass roofs, retractable panels, and modular body systems all borrow from the same idea, the desire to make cars feel open and alive. In a way, every removable roof today owes a small debt to Gordon Buehrig's 1948 sketch.